Just the other day, Plasma 6.1 dropped, and shortly after, I did a stream using it. Now, as with basically all of my streams, especially the ones where I start drinking, they very quickly turn into rambling nonsense. So here's my thoughts put together in a slightly more coherent format. The TLDR is Plasma 6.1 took the base that Plasma 6.0 was and mostly improves upon it, but it did end up revealing and creating a number of new bugs, some of which are going to be simple to fix. Others may require a little bit more work. So let's start with the first thing you're going to notice, and that's related to the cursor. Also, this is the new wallpaper that was going to be used for Plasma 6.1, but there were some issues in getting the full thing made. There's only one variant of it. The very first thing you'll notice is you move the cursor around a bit, and then all of a sudden it grows. And then you keep shaking it, and it keeps growing. Now, I have seen some people on Reddit who are like, I don't know if this is a bug or an intended feature. This is absolutely intended. This is supposed to happen. Now, what's not supposed to happen is, the fact that there doesn't seem to be a size limit. During my stream, I had a KDE dev in there, and, he thought there was a limit. I don't think there is a limit, or at least the limit doesn't work, or it's set way too high. Now, the other intended thing, which kind of does look like a bug, is the blurriness of the cursor. Now, a lot of this blurriness could be eliminated by scaling the cursor in a linear fashion, but it would end up just looking pixelated. Would that be an improvement? Absolutely, but having it be this nice, high-resolution cursor is a bit more of a problem because cursors on Linux aren't these nice, rescalable vector graphics. They are rastered images because of Xcursor. Now, there's a long story why it's like that, but the TLDR is X11 is old, and when Xcursor was made, people weren't magnifying cursors and people didn't have high resolution displays, so it wasn't really necessary. Also, vector graphics are more expensive computationally, so it just didn't happen. But we live in the future and a solution is being worked on. On Wayland, there is a protocol called Cursor Shape. This allows you to have nice, vector, scalable cursors and are likely going to be deployed to the user in Plasma 6.2, making use of a format called Hypercursor made by the Hyperland project. All of that is cool, but understandably, a lot of you probably don't want cursor magnification enabled. The way to disable it is go into your system settings, go to the accessibility, go to a setting called Shake Cursor, and then untoggle Shake Cursor to find it. Now, you can go and change the magnification level if you prefer to do that instead, but I just go and disable it entirely. On that note, the accessibility bell seems to be enabled by default now, so if you try to press escape in something like GIMP, you're probably going to hear it, and you're probably going to be annoyed by it. So you can also disable that here as well, or you can set it to a custom sound. Now, I don't know the limitation on the length. This is a 7-second clip. It has to be in an OGG format, but if you would like to troll people, this is certainly an option to do so. One very slight problem is before knowing the format was supposed to be OGG, we had to guess what it was supposed to be, because in the filter for the file picker, it says audio files, but it's not looking for an audio file. It's looking for a very specific audio file that is not at all clear otherwise. Now, on a more serious note that actually matters, the thing that I've talked about so many times and I was sick of dealing with, the cache bug. So, watch this IO bar right here. Okay. There are blips happening there, but those blips are unrelated to what I am doing. Using desktop effects is no longer constantly reading and writing from my drive as a cache. The cache bug is completely gone, and because of it, everything on Plasma feels so much snappier. Plasma is now completely on par with other desktops. Now, some people had never experienced this problem and it was working just fine for them, but when I saw this, when I opened up my tiling editor and it locked up my entire desktop, or I opened up my overview, or I opened up the Alt tab, or anything else, and it locked up my entire desktop, I was ready to quit Plasma because it was completely unusable. No longer. 6.1, it works like it should. Now, speaking of working like it should, the new edit mode. So, as always, there are two ways to get into it. If we go and right-click on the desktop and click Enter Edit Mode, or we go and click on the bar, and now it says Show Panel Configuration. Let's go from the desktop and go from there. With this wallpaper, honestly, it looks really, really nice. I don't know why, but one thing not mentioned in the earlier discussions is if you click on any of the empty space around the side, it's going to take you out of edit mode. Now, I'm not sure how I feel about that because there is already a couple of ways to get out of edit mode. We can click the escape key, or we can go and click exit edit mode up here. Having another way, I don't know, I feel like this is prone to accidentally quitting out, but I'll need to play around with it a bit more and let me know what you think down below. As for the core usability though, I do still think there is the issue where maybe things jump around just a little bit too much. It's fine for me, and I like it as it is. But if you are someone who heavily uses desktop zoom, so we go up here, and then we go up here, we click add widgets, well now all of the desktop shifted over here, and I don't really know how you can address that. Like, zoom is always going to be a weird case where things don't work the same way as you would expect. I think you could get used to it, but it is going to be another bit of a learning curve. Also, I showed it there, but I didn't actually mention it. If we click on the entire bar, now that takes you into the panel configuration. Now, you still do have the option of clicking this icon down here, or clicking right-click on here, and then show panel configuration. But when I first used the edit mode, I tried clicking on the bar and it didn't work, and now the entire thing acts like a button, and honestly, it does just feel a lot smoother to use. Now, being a new solution, it is gonna have some bugs. One of them being a label issue. So if we hover over the bar till it says show panel configuration and then click the bar, it very quickly changes to hide panel configuration. And I think I know why it's doing that, because this bar is acting like this button here. This button does have a hide panel configuration option. If we click it, it works. So because they're duplicating the behavior of the other button, but it doesn't actually have both states, it behaves a little bit weirdly. For the other issue, you kind of have to go out of your way to do. Firstly, make sure your system is not set to do not disturb so you can see system notifications. Let's go into edit mode and make a new panel, doesn't matter which one. Okay, if we go and delete the panel whilst we are still in edit mode, what's gonna happen is this prompt down here. Let's leave edit mode, click undo, and it's still in edit mode. This panel is not. We are not in edit mode right now, but this bar thinks it still is, and it will operate like it is in edit mode. Does the bug really matter? No. Should it be fixed? Probably. Is it high priority? Not really. Now, I talked about this in my video about changes, but I love the fact that there are now less silent errors happening on Plasma. One example is if we go to a desktop that has no windows on it, and I Alt-Tab, it now says no open windows. Previously, this would just be an empty box, and it looked like the Alt-Tab was just broken. In that same vein, if we have less than 3 virtual desktops, and we try to use the desktop cube, it gives you a warning. At least 3 virtual desktops are required to display the cube, but only 2 are present. Now, this is a good change. The only problem is right now the cube is broken, and if you use it too many times, the hotkey stops working. This is known about. This is going to be fixed in the next small patch, but it was a little bit annoying. Next, I want to talk about my new favorite desktop effect, and you've probably seen it happen a couple of times throughout the video. If I go and press a key, cursor vanishes. You actually can't see it on the recording. That is very interesting. So it actually is disappearing, but for some reason, that's really odd. I don't know why that happens. I don't know how it works in the background, but now there is the ability, if we go into the desktop effects, there is now an option called hide cursor. Very important, hide cursor is not enabled by default. Also, when you do enable it, the hide cursor on typing part is disabled, so make sure you check this box if you want it to hide on typing. Now, the inactivity duration doesn't actually work entirely properly, so it works hiding the cursor after that number of seconds, but there's supposed to be the option to set it to 0 to disable the inactivity duration. Now, the problem with that is the minimum of the GUI is 1, so you can't actually set it to 0 to disable that functionality. This is known about, and this is being worked on. As for some of the minor changes, like if we go to the shutdown interface, it now just shows you shut down and cancel. If you told me, also the same thing happens for restart as well. If you told me this is the way that Plasma always worked, I probably wouldn't have questioned it because it is such a small change. It doesn't really affect anything. Same with the tiling editor. This used to say vertical and horizontal. Now it says split left and right and split top and bottom. Again, it doesn't really change much, but it is kind of a nice change if the previous terms did confuse you. Keep in mind, there were already icons there, so the icons, at least in my opinion, did make it relatively clear. Whilst there is a lot of good, as you can tell from some of the stuff I mentioned earlier, there are some bugs being discovered, some of them new, others old, but there's still bugs that are being worked on. Things like in the system settings, if we go and right-click on the search, if we click anywhere else on the screen, it doesn't actually get rid of the right-click menu. The only place you can get rid of the right-click menu is places that are a search prompt. So either this one or ones in places like the desktop effects. Now, you've probably seen this one yourself or seen someone else talk about it, but sometimes things break in the system settings and just you get an error loading a QML file. Now, this seems to be related to something that Kirigami is doing, which is basically the KDE libadwaiter. I don't understand it entirely. It's related to caching. So most people, if they go and delete their cache, this stops happening. But also being worked on, it is known about, but was pretty annoying if you're one of the first people to see it. There are replication conditions which do exist. They're not 100% consistent, but you can make this happen on your own system. I just don't understand what's causing it to happen. Again, it is known about, it is being worked on, and is probably going to be fixed in the next version if it hasn't already been fixed by now. This one is much harder to show, but I've also noticed that adaptive sync, FreeSync, is considerably more broken than it was before. And I already disabled it because you can't use FreeSync, at least with the hardware that I have, because when I have something running with FreeSync, my screen has this very light flicker. That caused me to just disable it, but for the hell of it, I decided to re-enable it just to see what would happen. Sometimes I also notice my cursor lagging. It's a temporary thing, but it will drop down as if it's running at like 15 FPS. I don't know why. It's best to just not bother with adaptive sync and just use your stuff the way we traditionally used it. I don't know what exactly in the stack is breaking, whether it's Plasma, whether it's something with my hardware, whether it's the GPU drivers. All I know is I don't want to look at it when it's happening, so I just go and disable it. On the topic of I have no idea why it's happening, there is a weird issue that seems to happen more commonly when I have OBS open and I'm capturing my screen, but also fairly commonly on NVIDIA hardware as well, where if I full screen a window on my secondary monitors, it will load like an old state of the screen onto that monitor. Now, I have no idea why this is happening. It never happened before. I've never seen it on any other desktop. Also, I'm not the first person to discover this, so I'm pretty sure it has already been reported and is known about. If it's not, that's the problem, and that person probably should have reported it. But if it's not, I'll go and report it myself. It's not a big deal, and I can ignore it, and most people are probably never going to see it, but it is something that does make the experience just a little notch worse. Now, there is one thing where I'm not sure if it's a bug or I'm just stupid. So, one of the new settings added is called Edge Barrier. You can find this under the screen edges. So, I've got it set to none right now, but what it's supposed to do is basically add like a virtual padding between your monitors. Let's set it to something like 500. Now, the way I would expect this to work is I would move 500 pixels worth of distance and it would go to the other screen, but that's not how far I'm moving. I'm moving maybe, I don't know, 50, maybe 100 pixels, and no matter what the setting is set to, it always seems to operate in a way that doesn't seem to line up with what it's saying. Now, I could just not understand the way this setting worked, and that's entirely possible, but I think it's a bug. But it's something I never have to deal with, and you never dealt with before because it's a new setting, so you can just set it to 0, and then just not think about it, and everything works exactly the way it worked before. Now, in conclusion, here's the thing. Software is always gonna have bugs, and when you're something like Plasma, which has, I don't know how many features, and I have no idea how many new features were added, how many toggles were added, how many toggles interact with existing toggles. When you have systems like this, you're going to have issues that arise, maybe sometimes in the default configuration, but more often than not, in something just slightly outside of it that wasn't really considered. But, with all that being said, at least from where I stand, Plasma 6.1 is noticeably better than Plasma 6. It's worse in some ways that, to me, don't really matter. But the issues that I care about, like the cache bug, like less silent errors, having hide on typing, all of these things make 6.1 a better experience. So if maybe you're waiting on a 0.1 or maybe a 0.2 release, maybe now is a time to give it a shot and just see what it's like. If you don't like it, come back later and see what it's like then. But let me know your thoughts down below. Have you used Plasma in the past? Is Plasma 6 your first experience like me? Or are you a long-term user? And if you are using Plasma 6.1, let me know your thoughts down below. And if you liked the video, go like the video. And if you really like the video and you want to become one of these amazing people over here, check out the Patreon, Scribes, Libera Pay, linked in the description down below. That's going to be it for me, and eventually Cosmic is going to release, and then we'll talk about that.